Is there genuine scientific logic to the idea that women can subconsciously detect whether a man is an alpha or he is a beta? I detest these terms, guys. I really do. But from a frequency standpoint, if you're going to measure brain waves, there is an alpha brainwave. There is a beta brainwave. There is a theta. There is a delta. So let's use these terms apart from the more, colloquial man in, with a beard and smoking cigar. Yeah, I detest these particular ones. So this post, very interesting post, it goes into this premise. Is there a pheromonal beta? And is this the rationale behind this idea that women attraction is predicated on whether or not you are signaling to the world, to women, to the environment, to the universe, that you are infertile. You cannot reproduce on that level. And I believe there is some sound logic to this. So let's get into this. From a biomechanical standpoint, it is hypothesized that men who frequently masturbate may be unintentionally signaling a lower sexual status, what some would describe as the pheromonal beta. Women's biological systems often work subconsciously. They may be tuned to detect these signals. Men with consistently higher testosterone levels tend to demonstrate their sexual viability through assertive behavior. But on the other side of the coin, something that's perhaps less measurable is the amount of pheromones that they're secreting through saliva, through sweat, through urine, through their sexual fluids as well. In contrast, men with lower levels of testosterone, those experiencing the dulling and numbing but heightened pleasurable effects of PMO, are demonstrating to the world that they're not sexually viable, that they're not fertile, that they're not virile. And again, I believe this makes sense in my book, Masculine Gene Expression. I capture and detail some of the studies that show that pheromones like androstenedione, androstenone, all these pheromones are in abundance in individuals, or specifically mammals, but there's a reason they do studies on animals anyway. They are more abundant in animals that are less sexually licentious than others, meaning that they're not copulating to the point where they're sexually exhausted. And this makes sense because when you think about what nature's prime directive is, right? What is nature's prime directive? It is to propagate the continuation of the human race. So how would it do that? It would pair the individuals that are most fertile. If you have higher than average rates of testosterone, you are more fertile than a man who has lower than average rates of testosterone. And it would make sense from a fertile woman's perspective to give herself the best chance at producing offspring with the man that is more fertile. And fertility talks. Fertility speaks volumes. It speaks in such volumes as there are studies which show that women who are ovulating find heightened masculine characteristics more attractive than lower ones. The squareness of the jaw, the hair, the muscle bulk, and all these characteristics are associated with what? Higher than average rates of testosterone. What happens after the 7th day of abstinence? Testosterone goes up 140%. What happens those preceding days after it starts to come down? Androgen receptor density becomes more sensitive to the permeation and expression of testosterone. So although the testosterone might come down, the expression and the utilization and the value of the testosterone is more sensitive in the cells, meaning all of those characteristics will be expressed to a greater extent. This, for me, it's not just scientifically backed, but it's logical. Nature makes sense when you just understand what everything in the universe and in the earth is screaming towards, which is the perpetuation of biology. Everything, I know it's crass to say, but everything is kind of sexual in that way. From an evolutionary perspective, see, this guy and me are on the same wavelength. This makes sense. Males with less access to sexual partners those on the lower rungs of the dominance hierarchies, may have relied more heavily on masturbation for sexual release. Over time, behavioral and biochemical cues may have evolved to help females subconsciously distinguish between the fertile and the unfertile. It is not necessarily that men who masturbate emit bad pheromones, but they emit fewer sex related chemical signals due to physiological depletion. This diminished signaling may influence behavior less assertive, less pursuit of connection, which women could perceive as disinterest, even if it's not consciously recognized. In contrast, men who abstain and maintain high sexual energy may display more motivation and intent, which could register as attraction. I mean, that's the real social, behavioral, and temperamental effects that testosterone has. One of the interesting ones in the first chapter of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life is he showed that lobsters who mate have a lower reflex time to go and battle, go and dominate a potential sexual opposition, right? So the idea is, if your testosterone is higher, maybe you get rejected from the girl that you cold approach at the bar or on the street or in the shop. Doesn't matter. Your recovery time is lessened, and you're more likely to go and seek out another partner, or at least try to seek out another partner, than a man with lower testosterone, because he is going to be more sensitive towards negative emotion, anxiety, depression, lethargy, things like that. So socially, equally, it makes a lot of sense. There's also a well-known cultural double standard around masturbation. Female self-pleasure is often framed as empowering, expressive, and socially acceptable. Male masturbation, on the other hand, is frequently stigmatized as it reflects inadequacy or failure. At first glance, this seems to be unfair, but if this double standard may serve a deeper, more functional social purpose, we need to discuss it. I think the main difference is also you're not losing something if you are a woman. The fluids that you are losing, the energy that you are losing, comes through ovulation, when you lose an egg every month. Men are not limited to this. They can tax themselves as much as they want. In many ways, some people have made the analogy or made the relationship that sexual release, from a man's perspective, is kind of like PMS for a woman. The woman experiences a lot of negative emotions, a lot of emotional disharmony during menstruation, and you can make a compelling argument. In fact, Julian Lee, in his book Bliss of the Celibate, outlined a chapter called The Male Period, and he made the analogy that sexual release, especially masturbation, is pretty much practically the same when you look at the symptoms. And I don't think I think there's a lot of value to that idea. Sigmund Freud once said that all energy is sexual, suggesting that when sexual desires are unmet, the underlying drive is often redirected to other goals or ambitions. Historically, men have been the primary builders, explorers, inventors, and conquerors, those who, for better or worse, have most significantly shaped human history. It's plausible that this outward ambition has been fueled, at least in part, by the sublimation of sexual energy, Nikola Tesla being one of the more famous examples of that. Masturbation short-circuits this process. It diffuses the drive, it pacifies hunger, and reduces the urgency to achieve. In that light, it's not hard to imagine why cultures might have developed narratives that discourage male masturbation, not out of prudishness, but to promote discipline, focus, drive, ambition, zeal, vigor, the perpetuation of the human race. So the idea that men who don't masturbate are more desirable or powerful, I don't think it's a social idea. I think it's actually based and grounded in something real. It could be socially evolved mechanism designed to encourage traits that benefit both the individual and society. Abstinence. whether voluntary or circumstantial, may signal sexual competence while preserving the motivation to pursue meaningful goals. What do you think, gentlemen? Are these theories? Are these fact? I am more of the opinion that these are facts as opposed to theories, but you can let me know in the comments. Speak soon.